As we gain experience with photography, one of the things that is bound to improve is our post-processing skills. When I was shooting with film, even though I had experience in darkroom processing, when I made the switch to digital, I found the software editing side to be probably the most challenging aspect of digital photography. But now that I've been doing this for about 15 years, I'm much more capable and I have a better understanding of what I can do with my photos to improve them. I photographed this image in 2011. It's not a bad photo, but my editing is somewhat bland. So what I'm going to do here is edit the same RAW file in Luminar using some of the tools I now have available that I did not have access to when I originally created it. So let me jump over to that RAW file. This is what the image looks like with no edits applied to it. I'm inside of the edit view, and I have the Essentials category active. I'm going to click on the Light Tool, and I'll begin by making some adjustments to the temperature. Overall, this photo has a little bit of a warm look to it. There's obviously a lot of reddish coloring in the rocks, and I'd like to subdue some of that. So I'm going to take the temperature slider, I'm going to drag it to the left, and oftentimes I like to kind of move it around and I want to see the extremes. Because sometimes when I can find those extremes, it's easier for me to actually find a good balanced point. So I'm just watching my photo and I'm making my adjustments and I'm going to stop there. What I did was just decrease that temperature slider to add a little bit more blue to the photo. I'm going to do a quick before and after toggle. It's a very subtle adjustment, but it did help to subdue kind of that reddish color. I'd also like to go down to the shadows slider. There's a lot of kind of dark area in the foreground. So I'm going to increase the shadow slider, which should kind of add fill light to those areas. Again, I'm just watching my photo. I'm going to push it kind of high. I think that's a good stopping point there. Again, I'll do a before and after toggle to get a good preview of what it looks like. Next, I'm going to go down to AI Enhance. For nearly all of the photos I use, I like to use this AI accent slider, or at least like to see what it does to my photo. So I'm going to increase this slider, and I'll stop about right there. That looks like it's a good stopping point. And I'm going to toggle just this tool off and on, and you can see it added some contrast and also a little bit of brightness to the photo. Sometimes for my images, this would be a good stopping point, but I'd really like to do a lot more with this photo. Next, I'll go down to the Color tool, click it to expand it. And usually when I go into the Color tool, I like to play with this Remove Color Cast slider. So I'm going to increase that slider. If I were to push it all the way to the right, you can see it takes away a lot of that warmth. All the way back to the left, and we're back to where we started. And I'm going to find somewhere in between. So let me toggle this off and on. You can see that it really did a good job of taking away kind of that reddish color cast that was actually in more areas of the photo than I realized. Now lastly, in the Essentials category, I'm going to go down to Landscape Enhancer, and I'm going to add a little bit of Golden Hour, which is actually going to bring back some of that warmth, but it does it a little bit more evenly. And I think that's probably a good stopping point. I can always go back and change it if I don't like what it did. I'm also going to increase the Foliage Enhancer a little bit. I don't want to go too crazy with this. Sometimes increasing it all the way to the right can make things look a little too green. This one's actually not doing too bad of a job, so I'm just going to add a touch of this. I have it set to about 17 there. And let me toggle this off and on. And I'm just adding and layering all of these changes. I'm going to do a full before and after to see where we are at. Looks like I've brought a lot of the color back, and it's looking really good. Now I'm going to jump over to the Creative category. I'm going to add a new sky to this photo. So I'm going to click on the Creative category on the right, and I'll select the tool at the top, the AI Sky Replacement. I'm going to start just by adding the blue sky one. I want to see how well that sky replacement does, and it's doing a pretty good job. So I can kind of just go through these skies until I find one that I like. And I think I'm going to land on that blue sky number 6. That looks like it fits pretty well with the image, but I still want to make a few changes to the settings in this tool. I'm going to start out by using the Relight Scene slider. This is one that's kind of fun to play with if you just want to see what it does. It basically just helps blend the sky with the image a little bit better. Sometimes the default setting is all you need to work with, But increasing it, I think, did a pretty good job. Let me toggle that off and on. Next, I'm going to go into the advanced settings, so I'll click that button there. I'm going to go down to atmospheric haze. I'm going to increase this slider, and this helps add haze to the sky as well as the image. So with that previous adjustment, it kind of made things a little too dark, but adding some atmospheric haze helped to kind of even things out a little bit. We all want our photos to be bold and vibrant, but the reality is they're not always like that in real life. And so sometimes playing with these kind of sliders that add a little bit of imperfection to your image help make them look a lot more real. I'd also like to increase the sky temperature. It's very blue, and it looks like it fits pretty well, but I think it could benefit from a touch of warmth. I'm going to go ahead and do a full before and after just to kind of see where I am at so far. And I've already made some really good adjustments to this. I'm really happy with this. Next, I'm going to open up the Mystical tool, and I'm going to increase the slider. I usually like to keep this one somewhere between 20 and 30. I usually don't push the slider much higher than that. This adds a nice amount of contrast, and it also adds a touch of glow. If you were to push it really far to the right, then it's going to get a little crazy and a little bit too glowy, which is why I like to keep it at a lower setting. Next, I'm going to go into the Lut tool. If you ever have a photo and the color just doesn't quite look the way you want it to, or it just needs something, I'd recommend going into the Color Styles Lut tool and just kind of play around with the settings and the different Lut files, because sometimes that's all it needs is just a little bit of colorization. And it's really easy to work with. You can just click on that drop down and just hover over the LUTs and you'll see it change right in front of you. I think I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to use the 1990 filter. There's something about this specific LUT that kind of almost desaturates the photo a little bit, but in a good way, because I still keep seeing this over reddish warmth in the image, and I kind of want it to be a little bit more balanced. So let me go ahead and toggle this off and on. I think I'm going to decrease the amount a little bit, so I'm going to take it from 30 to 20. I'll try that once again, and that did a great job of really balancing things out. The last thing I'm going to play with here inside of the creative category is film grain. And I always use this specific tool after I've added a sky. And the reason I do that is because when you add a sky, the new sky that you added is usually going to have a different grain quality than your image. And adding some more film grain to everything, it kind of helps to unify everything. So if you want to be really particular, you can zoom into the area where the sky and whatever you added the sky to kind of overlap. And it's also a good idea to zoom in when you are using the film grain tool because you don't want to overdo it. So I'm going to keep it at a really low setting here. I just pushed it up to 7, and that's very subtle. You might not even be able to see it in this recording, but it did kind of help to unify both the sky and the image to help them seem like they are actually one photograph. Now I'm going to jump over to the professional category. So I'll click professional on the right, and I'm going to go up to the color enhancer tool. One of my favorite things to work with in this tool is the color contrast. So I'm going to start by increasing that amount, and I'm just watching the photo. And if you push it too far, it's going to look kind of crazy. So I'm going to keep it down probably about 20 or so. And if I toggle this off and on, you can see it really added a good amount of contrast. It has that blue background and kind of that reddish orange foreground, so it's creating contrast between those two colors. But another thing you can play with is the hue. It doesn't actually change the hue of your photo. It just kind of changes the hue that it's looking for when it's creating that color contrast. And you'll see how it changes as I move that slider. So I think that looks a little bit more natural. Let me go ahead and toggle this off and on. And that basically helped to add a little bit of brightness to the rocks in the foreground. So now things look a little bit more balanced. I'm pretty much finished here, but I'm going to jump back to the Essentials category because I would like to add a vignette. So I'll click on Essentials on the right. I'll go down to that very bottom tool. I'm going to make sure I have advanced settings open. And I'll begin by reducing the amount slider. And oftentimes I will create a much darker vignette that I normally would want to keep when I'm finished with my photo, just because I want to be able to see all of the other changes that I'm making more clearly. So now that I have a really dark vignette, I can go down to that feather slider, I can increase the feather, now I can actually see that change, Maybe add a touch of inner light. And then once I finish there, I'm going to go back up to the amount slider and move it to a more appropriate setting. And now it doesn't really look like I have a vignette, which is kind of what I'm going for. But if I toggle this off and on, it's there. It's very subtle. I could probably actually reduce it a little bit more. And that added a nice touch. So now I've taken this image that I photographed almost 10 years ago, and I've given it a much more beautiful look than I originally had created.